Good morning, students. Today we'll be reading Chapter 4 of Midnite. Midnite rides again. When Midnite woke up the next morning in the prison, he felt as people usually feel after drinking a lot of wine. That is, he felt awful. His head was aching and his mouth tasted like a sheepskin shoe. But soon afterwards, Trooper O'Grady brought him a cup of beef tea, and when he had drunk that, he seemed to be a little stronger. "How are you now?" asked the trooper, who looked a bit pale himself. "Not as bad as I was," said Midnite sadly. "We have to go to the court today," said the trooper. "Here is a glass of rum to give you courage in case the judge sentences you to be hanged by the neck until you are dead." "I shall never touch drink again," said Midnite in a stern voice. "I hoped you would say that," said O'Grady, and he emptied the glass in one swallow. Midnite got out of bed and washed his face and cleaned his teeth and combed his hair. "I wish I did not feel so miserable," he said. "Mrs. Schiffel has sent you a cake," said Trooper O'Grady, "with a file and a rope ladder in it, but I'm afraid you are not allowed to have presents like that." "Never mind," said Midnite. "It makes me happy to know that I have a friend." "That's the spirit," said the trooper, "and you have a better friend in me. Now hold out your arm to be handcuffed, and let's go to court." Handcuffed together, Midnite and the trooper walked through the great grey echoing corridors of the prison, listening to the prisoners groaning and clanking their chains and shaking the bars of their cages. The huge iron door clanged shut behind them, and they were out in the street of the town. The sun was shining and the wind was blowing off the sea, and all of a sudden Midnite wanted so badly to be free that he almost cried. As they came towards the court, Midnite saw a great crowd of ladies waiting outside. That made him nervous, and he hung back and dragged on the handcuffs. "What's the matter?" asked Trooper O'Grady, stopping. "I feel shy," said Midnite. "Hold my hand," said the trooper kindly. So, hand in hand, they walked through the crowd, and it was not so bad as Midnite had expected. All the ladies stood on tiptoe and stretched their necks to see him, and cried, "Isn't he handsome? Oh, doesn't he look fierce?" Although, to tell the truth, Midnite was neither fierce nor handsome. But he was young and very strong, and that was enough for the ladies. They wanted him to be handsome, and so that is what they saw. When Midnite and O'Grady came into the court, which was packed with ladies all waving fans, they found Judge Pepper sitting on his bench writing in a book. As soon as the judge looked up and saw Midnite, his face went purple, and he shouted, "Guilty!" "Guilty of what, Your Honour?" said Midnite. "Guilty of stealing my watch and money," said the judge, "and threatening to tear out my heart and eat it." "Excuse me, Your Honour," said Trooper O'Grady. "That threat was made by the prisoner's ferocious Siamese confederate, who has never been seen." "Whose side are you on?" demanded the judge. "Oh, yours, of course," said the trooper. "Then keep your evidence to yourself," snapped the judge. At that moment, a beautiful, bad-tempered cockatoo flew in through a window behind the bench and sat down on the judge's great grey wig. "What are you staring at?" said the judge to Midnite. "You, Your Honour," said Midnite, grinning. "Don't be impertinent," said the judge, flying into a rage. If the judge had ever watched a flock of cockatoos in a tree, he would have known that among cockatoos rage is infectious. But he did not know this, and he did not know either that he had a cockatoo sitting on his wig, so without another thought he flew into a rage. Major's crest shot up like an opened fan, his brass feathers puffed out, and in half a second he looked twice as big and, most remarkably, like Judge Pepper. "Silence in court!" shouted the judge, banging on the bench with his hammer, for the whole court was laughing. Major wanted silence just as indignantly as the judge did, and he furiously flapped one wing as if he wished that he had a good big heavy hammer of his own, and opened his beak very fast as if he were saying rather impatient things about some people. "Silence!" screamed the judge. "If there is any more laughing, this court will be abolished." Major cocked his head on one side and looked suddenly thoughtful. He did not know what all the noisy people were carrying on about, but it occurred to him that if he went to bed, they might be polite enough to stop. So he put the tip of his wing to his beak as if to say "shh," and dropped his head on his breast and closed his eyes. Of course, he didn't really go to sleep, but he wanted the court to be quiet so that he could hear what Judge Pepper had to say before he took action against him. The plan turned out to be a good plan. The court was not abolished, and as Major had stopped behaving like a small Judge Pepper sitting on Judge Pepper's head, the laughter raggedly died away. Soon, thanks to Major, there was actually a kind of silence in court, setting aside a few silly giggles from Trooper O'Grady. "Prisoner at the bar," said the judge with a snarl of relief. "Have you anything to say before I pass sentence?" "Yes," said Midnite. "What?" said the judge. "Please don't pass sentence," said Midnite. "I'm a bushranger, Your Honour. I was not made to live in a prison." "You should have thought of that," said the judge, "before you stole my watch and my money." "But I didn't," said Midnite. "You didn't?" said the judge furiously. "Why, I gave them to you with my own hands." "He stole them," said Midnite, pointing at Trooper O'Grady. "He picked my pocket." Trooper O'Grady suddenly slapped himself on the forehead as if to get even with himself for having a bad memory. He put his hand in his pocket and brought out the judge's watch and purse. "It is true, Your Honour," he said. "I did release them from the prisoner, and in the excitement I forgot to give them back to you." "Throw them here," said the judge suspiciously. Trooper O'Grady threw the watch and purse to the judge, and the judge carefully counted his money. Then he looked fiercely at Trooper O'Grady. "There are 4 gold sovereigns missing," he said. "He took them," said Trooper O'Grady, pointing at Midnite. "I did not," said Midnite. "I didn't have time. He took them." "Did I?" said Trooper O'Grady. "Well, perhaps I did. Keep it back from my wages, Your Honour." Judge Pepper put his head on one side and stared ferociously at O'Grady. The movement roused Major, who put his head on the other side and stared ferociously at everybody else. "Silence in court," shouted the judge as everyone burst out laughing. All the noise was making Major quite savage, and he especially did not like to have people shout and bang so loudly when he was sitting on their wigs. So he puffed up all his feathers in a splendiferous rage, and did his best to scream "Silence in court" over and over. His beak and tongue moved so fast that they were just a blur, and his wing battered the judge's head with an invisible hammer. "Silence! Silence! Silence!" screamed the judge. His hammer broke, and he threw the pieces at Trooper O'Grady. "The prisoner is sentenced to 25 years in the Great Grey Jail." "What for?" Midnite shouted back above the noise. "For laughing," shouted the judge. "He is laughing too," shouted Midnite, pointing at Trooper O'Grady, who was laughing so hard that he was bursting his buttons. "Prisoner at the bar," shouted the judge, "you will do yourself no kind of good by making preposterous charges against the police." "He is my best human friend," shouted Midnite. "I want him to be in jail with me." "Out of the question," shouted the judge. "Judges do not send troopers to jail. If you behave yourself, Trooper O'Grady can come and visit you on Sundays." "I don't think I'll be in jail next Sunday," shouted Midnite. What? What? Shouted the judge. "What's that you say? Not in jail next Sunday? You'll be in jail for the next 1,300 Sundays. Take him away." When the judge said that, Major shot up his crest, puffed out his feathers, flapped his wings, and with a tremendous shriek flew out the window, clutching the judge's wig in his claws. It was never found again. Major dropped it in the river, where it was swallowed by a shark who carried it away inside him to the Red Sea. Trooper O'Grady and Midnite went back to the Great Grey Jail handcuffed together, and when they came to Midnite's cell, the trooper took off the handcuffs and said goodbye. "I will visit you on Sunday," said O'Grady, shaking hands. "I don't think I shall be in jail on Sunday," said Midnite. "Well, I will come and see," said O'Grady, "and if you are not, I will leave a message." Then O'Grady waved his hand, which had the governor's ring on it, and went away with a regretful face to play billiards, while Midnite sat down on his bed to await for his supper. Soon it was dark outside, and the warder came to Midnite's door with the evening meal. First, the warder undid the chains that fastened the door. Then he undid the 3 bars across it. Then he unlocked the door with a great grinding key, and gave Midnite a knife and fork and some bread and butter. After that, the warder locked everything up again and clip-clopped away down the echoing corridors. Midnite sat down on his bed and ate and drank the bread and water. As he was swallowing the last crumb, he heard a sound on the window-sill, and when he looked up, he saw Cat peering through the bars. Cat looked awfully sick. "Cat, you do look awfully sick," said Midnite. "It is the wine," said Cat in a tired voice. "I shall be all right in a day or 2. "I will never touch drink again," said Midnite. "Nor will I," said Cat. "It is a kind of poison." "I've had a miserable day," said Midnite. "I am in jail for 25 years. "Oh, no, you're not," said Cat. "Are you going to rescue me?" said Midnite. "You're going to rescue yourself," said Cat. "This is not a very strong cell that you are in, and Major and I have been working on it. If you come here to the window, you will see where we have been digging at one of the bars, which is not very firm in the wall. Go on digging with your knife and fork, and you'll be able to pull it out of the wall and wiggle through." "Bravo, Cat," said Midnite, and he started digging away with his knife and fork. Before long, being very strong, he was able to pull the bar right out of the wall. He tied the bar in a knot and left it on his bed in order to strike terror into the heart of the warder. Then he wriggled through the window and dropped onto the back of Red Ned, who was waiting outside for him. "Come, Cat," said Midnite. "Come along, Jip and Major," and the gang galloped off into the darkness. Soon they came to a long new bridge with a white ribbon across it. "What is that, Cat?" asked Midnite, as Red Ned broke the ribbon. "It is to show that the bridge is new," said Cat. "The governor was going to cut the ribbon with some gold scissors and declare it open tomorrow." "Oh," said Midnite, "do you think we should be riding on it?" "No," said Cat, "but it is a great honour." And so they galloped on. They galloped and galloped all night, and Midnite was so happy to be free again that he cheered and sang all the way. At last the beautiful sunrise shone over the bush, and they found themselves in Midnite's orchard, where the fruit trees were covered in pink and white blossoms, and the butcher birds were warbling in the tall forest. Red Ned was so tired by that time that Midnight decided not to go to the Hidden Valley until the next day, and so, after feeding the animals, he cooked a hearty breakfast for himself. And then, in the room where he had slept ever since he was a little boy, and still listening to the birds in the forest at their morning song, he fell into a deep and happy sleep. While Midnight was sleeping in the house in the orchard, Dora was taking a thoughtful walk in the bush outside the Hidden Valley. Dora had learned to open and close Midnight's gate, and she often went for a stroll by herself to show the other cattle that she was superior. But on this day Dora was out walking with a special purpose. Midnight and the rest of the gang had not been home to the hideout for 2 nights, and Dora was exceedingly worried about them. So she wandered and wandered and pondered and hoped that somewhere she might find their tracks and be able to follow them. As she walked through the beautiful, misty, sweet-smelling bush, Dora found that her worries were fading away and that she grew happier and happier. The reason was that on the very next day Dora was expecting to have a little new calf, and nothing in the world makes a cow so happy and thoughtful and soft-hearted as that. Presently, Dora heard a manly voice singing to himself in the bush, and when he stole up to investigate, she found a tall black horse grazing in a clearing, and a long thin man sitting by a campfire and singing as he watched and waited till his billy boiled. This is what the man sang: "A little bit of sugar and a little bit of tea, a little bit of flour you can hardly see, and without any meat between you and me, it's the murder of a life by Christmas." Alas, thought Dora soft-heartedly, it is a poor jolly swagman who is down on his luck, and he is such a nice-looking chap. She stood, peeping at him from the bush and wondering whether, when the billy boiled, he might not like some milk for his tea. Just then the man began talking to himself. You may have noticed that in real life people do not talk to themselves very much, and you rarely hear them say anything interesting. But it is different in books, and this is true, and this is a true book. While Dora listened, the man spoke to himself as follows: "Why do I want to be Midnight's best human friend?" "A friend of Midnight's," thought Dora, growing excited. "I shall most certainly offer him milk for his tea." The man continued: "I want to be Midnight's best human friend because he is an idiot. Everybody likes me at first, and says that I am a nice-looking chap, yet when they know me better," and here a tear rolled down the man's cheek, "they say I'm a dirty, rotten rogue cop. But Midnight is so stupid that he will always like me, and will go on thinking me a nice chap for ever after." Dora was rather puzzled by this speech, and did not quite know what to make of it. If she had been a more experienced cow, she would have known from the man's clothes that he was not a jolly swagman at all, but a trooper. But Dora had never seen a trooper before, and so she had to wait for the man to explain himself. The trooper continued: 2. Why do I want to keep Midnight in the great grey jail? What? Thought Dora, pricking up her ears. Why, this must be the man I have heard them speak of. This must be Trooper O'Grady. And in a second or two Dora had changed from a soft-hearted cow to a cow so ferocious that she could hardly keep herself from bellowing like a wild bull. O'Grady went on: A. I want to keep Midnight in the great grey jail because then I shall always know where he is, and it is no use having a best friend if you never know where to find him. B. I want to keep Midnight in the great grey jail because then the King and the Governor, the Queen and the Governor will be pleased with me and will give me medals and will promote me from a pickpocket to a misappropriator. C. I want to keep Midnight in the great grey jail so that I can continue to do what I am doing today, which is to search for his secret hideout in order to bushrange all his plunder. That was too much for Dora, and with a thunderous bellow she came crashing out of the bush and galumphing across the clearing with her head down and her sharp horns aimed at O'Grady. When O'Grady saw what he thought was a wild yellow bull galumphing towards him, he sprang to his feet, uttering one shriek, and ran up a tree with the speed of a lizard. The consequence was that Dora crashed full tilt into the tree trunk, which did not improve her temper at all, and for some minutes she stood there shaking her head and muttering the most terrible mutterings. It happened that the tree Trooper O'Grady had run up was a very young gum tree, of the kind that bends if you put too much weight on it, and for this reason Trooper O'Grady had not been able to run up it very far. In fact, he had not been able to climb far enough to get his legs out of Dora's reach. As Dora looked at Trooper O'Grady's legs, and Trooper O'Grady looked down over his shoulder at Dora, they both remembered a rather awful story that they had heard from their mothers. This story was about a man who had run up a tree to get away from a bull, and had not been able to get his legs out of range of the bull's tongue. What the bull had done was to lick and lick at the man's legs with his rough tongue until the legs were all licked away. Dora and Trooper O'Grady considered this story, in their different ways, for several minutes. Then, with a faint blush and a few flicks of her horn, Dora tore off Trooper O'Grady's trousers and began to lick his legs. Trooper O'Grady gave the most hysterical shriek that was ever been heard from a trooper, and flew to the top of the tree like a bird. But the tree, as I have said, was a springy sort of tree, and with the weight of O'Grady near the crown of it, it began slowly and gracefully to bow towards the ground. Jolly good, thought Dora, and as the tree-top came within her reach, she seized some branches between her teeth and pulled with all her weight. Then, when she had stretched the tree hard and tight, she jumped back and let go. Like an arrow shot from a bow, Trooper O'Grady sailed through the clearing and landed in a prickly bush. "Harumph!" bellowed Dora, galumphing towards him. "Help!" shrieked Trooper O'Grady, and without a look behind him he sped away through the lovely early morning bush, where all the kookaburras were laughing their heads off. So great was O'Grady's speed that his horse had quite a job to catch up with him. It was not until he was a mile or more from Dora that the trooper began to feel safe again. Then, after pausing to make a few repairs to himself, he sadly and painfully climbed back in the saddle and rode off to seek sympathy and trousers. 2 hours later, dressed in a saddlecloth and with bald patches on his legs where Dora had licked him, O'Grady arrived at Mrs. Schiffel's house, intending to ask the good lady whether the late Mr. Schiffel had left any unmentionable men's wear behind. What was his astonishment when Mrs. Schiffel, at first sight of him, rushed from the house, waving her arms above her head in a defiant and exulting manner, and cried, "Rhubarb to you, Trooper O'Grady! Captain Midnite has ridden again!"